Hi everyone, it's Denise from Newbie Books and welcome back. Today is Thursday, the 5th of February, and I want to give everybody a little uh, catching up on what I'm reading right now. First, let me show you something that I ended up getting in the mail. This is a pre-order and it's authored by Susan Wise Bauer. You've heard me mention her names many times before. She's one of my favorite authors. And this is a new, I would say, yeah, it's definitely history, and it's based on the theme is basically sickness or illness throughout history and how it's affected us and our lives. So it doesn't seem like it'd be interesting, but I like how she's broken this down. It's called The Great Shadow, a history of how sickness shapes what we do, think, believe, and buy. And I find that intriguing because some of those things I haven't really thought about. Yeah, what would we buy? Well, what would we think? I mean, the first thing I thought of were maybe old wives' tales, but I'm sure it goes beyond that. Here's the categories: Paradise Lost. We move into cities and find ourselves at a point of no return. The birth of guilt. We try to avoid the anger of the gods. Priests and physicians. Natural and supernatural separate, but not entirely. Defining disease. We decide that sickness comes from a lack of balance. And then she moves on to a second section entitled Interlude, an important historical note. And she touches on these various aspects: the will of God, poison and pogrom, seeking drugs, lost in space, north and south, seeds of sickness, passions, vaccine bewilderment, resisting contagion, a world of worms, surrounded by miasma, terror, fear of others, this is war, disposable culture, exhilaration, and fragility. And there's a quote she has in her opening page that reads, "Of all exercises in humility, that of admitting ignorance and helplessness in the face of imminent death is one of the most difficult." And that is a quote from Charles Rosenberg, The Cholera Epidemic of 1832 in New York City. And I believe that was published in 1959. I find this very interesting. One of the factors that piqued my interest is that when I was taking let me see, this was in my junior year. No, it was in my senior year, the first semester. I took a class that was a combination of history and literature. And the theme, was it? No, it wasn't that class. It was the very first history class I take, the historian's craft, when you learn about writing about history and how to do that properly. The theme we were given to write about was illness, and our instructor limited it to the United States and a certain time period, I believe. And then we had to put together our final essay based on that particular criteria. And I just found it interesting that I learned so much. My chosen topic was valley fever, not something that those of you who live on, let's say, the East Coast or the Midwest would hear about. But here on the West Coast, especially in parts of California that are more inland, that are highly agricultural, Arizona as well, New Mexico, because of the dryness of the dirt. And then when we have the rains, that combination and the way that it happens, we have spores that are produced and they lay dormant. And a couple of years ago, when we had the last Coachella big old celebration that they have every year, it was very windy. And a lot of people that had gone to that Coachella gathering ended up with valley fever. And it mimics other illnesses like pneumonia or bronchitis. So it's misdiagnosed a lot of the time, especially when you live in an area that just doesn't have a lot of experience with that. And I just learned a whole bunch about it. It's actually a fungus. So you can't treat it with antibiotics or antivirals. You have to treat it with antifungals, which are very hard on the human body. So they end up doing their damage as well. So valley fever was a fascinating subject for me. And going along the same lines, Susan Wise Bauer is just studying the general topic of illness and how it has affected us as a community of people living where we are. I don't think she's restricting it to the United States. I think she's doing generally, throughout parts of the world, perhaps Europe and the United States. I don't know yet. I haven't delved into it. But this looks like it's a good read and something that could be applied for Historathon. I don't know how far back she goes, but I'm going to say it's probably way back. But it's an idea for Historathon. So, The Great Shadow by Susan Wise Bauer. And this is from St. Martin's Press, and it was released this month. All right. Speaking of Historathon, let me tell you what I finished. Because I had a setback from my recovery from surgery, and I had that week where I was barely able to read anything, I fell behind. And I was working on this book here, 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. And I found myself not quite where I needed to be. So I think about halfway, but there were only a few days left in the month. And I knew I wasn't going to finish it in time. So I was sort of struggling. Should I keep pushing forward with this into February, but then that'll set me back on these other books that I've had my eyes on. And I was really stuck because I didn't want to just DNF it and then move on to the next thing. It just bugged me. So what I ended up doing is, because I was also reading the graphic novel to accompany it, I thought that the best compromise would be, let me finish the book in this format, because at least it will give me the whole story. Reading this through will give me the whole story that's included in the smaller book, the smaller book being in much more detail. And I felt that was the better compromise. So I finished reading 1177 BC. I read the graphic novel all the way through, and I read the original halfway through. So this has its little green dot because I finished it. And this one has a little yellow dot because I didn't quite finish it. So there's that. And what will be coming next in next book that I'm reading for Historathon, I chose Apollonius of Rhodes, The Voyage of Argo. Shorter book. If I get through this in the next week, then I'll pick up my third book. I'm just trying to be cautious, because the one I really did want to read next is this one, The Odyssey of Homer by Emily Wilson. I haven't read her translation yet, and I would have preferred to read this one next, but again, I'd rather err on the side of caution for this. There's 2 months left, yes, this month and next month, but let's see how it goes. So this is my next one for Historathon. What am I currently reading? Well, I am reading along with Jim at Great Books, Big Ideas. For Black History Month, he's reading Frederick Douglass, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. And after I had pulled this off my shelf, I saw the dot and I realized, oh wow, I have read this before. But it's great that I'm reading it again, because as you all know, when you read through something, the second or third time, each time we read something again, we catch something that we didn't get the time before. And that's exactly what's happening now. So I'm enjoying this read. It's reminding me of the incredible person of Frederick Douglass, his determination, his that deep desire he had to improve upon himself by furthering his education and just dedicating himself to that, and really just that resistance he had. I am not going to remain enslaved. This was not going to be his life. It's just so completely admirable. I love reading stories like this of people who have tenacity and they just go for it, and great, good for him. So I finished chapter 5 and I'm working my way forward. I'm trying to see if there was a quote here that really struck me. Here it is. And this is at the end of chapter 5 in the last paragraph, when he talks about what he sensed inside of himself, and it was this: from my earliest recollection, I date the entertainment of a deep conviction that slavery would not always be able to hold me within its foul embrace. So it was there he had that spark, that conviction inside him that this would not be him. And it reminded me so much of, and I don't know when I watched this, but sometime in the past I had watched a show that involved Oprah Winfrey, and she was talking to someone else rather than the other way around. And she said that she remembers being a little girl and she was at her grandmother's house in Mississippi. She was at her grandmother's house, and her grandmother was boiling clothes. There were sheets for the white family that she worked for, doing this at home. She's left work, but she's doing this at home, which blew my mind. She already worked hard all day. And Oprah remembers watching her grandmother boiling this clothes, and it was cold out, and she saw her grandmother's breath in the cold air. This detail that she brought up, and how her grandmother said something along the lines of, "Watch how I do this, because this is what you're going to do when you grow up." And Oprah remembers just saying inside of her, "No, I won't." It's like she had that inner conviction. It was already decided. And that's the same thing that happened with Frederick Douglass. He knew slavery would not be his life. I just think that's so cool. And then what I'm still reading, this is for my Middle Ages study, and I'm continuing to work my way through Cur Deus Homo by Anselm of Canterbury. And you know, it's interesting. It's going through the standard conversational back and forth, like Socrates talking to someone who's asking him lots of questions. And they're going into, okay, the nature of God, and then the angels, the role of sin, or and what it means, and how, when based, on the Judeo-Christian tradition, that in the Garden of Eden, because Adam and Eve didn't obey, they disobeyed because they ate from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they were exiled. They could no longer live in the Garden of Eden anymore. And this sin nature, this original sin, is something that we all inherit when we're born, right? So talking about that, Anselm, in debating this person whom he's talking to, talks about topics such as, obedience is owed to God. That's a given, and he talks about, and then they go into, so how is man or humanity going to make that right? How are they going to pay back what they took away and do it in a satisfactory manner? I'm really making this super simple. And then they go into talking about the angels, and they talk about something I've never heard of in all my years of Catholic school, catechism classes, and even reading, and educating myself about my faith later on in adulthood. I never encountered this. And it was this. And I know this is not doctrine in the church. I'm sure this is one of those things that there's one of those ideas that they kind of just talk about every now and then and wonder about, but it's nothing that is set in stone. And this is that when Lucifer, who was a beautiful angel, rebelled against God and was thrown into hell, and now we know him as Satan, he took a whole bunch of the angels with him, and they are now the demons. So that's the general story. And that gap of angels, that number that was lost during that rebellion, can only be replaced with holy men and women, therefore the Christians. And I never heard of that. I said, "Ooh, really? How'd they come to that conclusion?" I don't know. I don't know the history behind it, but this is the belief that as soon as that last and final angel that was lost is replaced by another human being, another holy person, then finally Christ will come. I never heard of that, but I found it fascinating. I kept reading on, going, this is something new. But I've gone beyond that. Now it's going into the nature of Christ and such things like, well, why couldn't God become man? Why couldn't the Holy Spirit become man? Why did it have to be God the Son becoming man? And then Anselm goes through, the different reasons for that. Oh, that's interesting. All right. Here's one argument, he said. And I kind of chuckled because it's very hard for us finite beings to try to explain the infinite. So sometimes the words that are chosen sound kind of silly, but sometimes we just don't have a better word or a better phrase for it. And Anselm said, if it was God the Father who became human, who became man, then he would not only be, how is it? He'd be the son of his mother, but also the grandfather. I'm trying to get this straight in my head, but also the grandfather of the grandson of her parents. It got confusing, but he would end up being both son and grandson. And I thought, that sounds kind of silly, but how are we going to explain the infinite? We never will. As long as we're on this side of things, we're never going to be able to explain it. And sometimes some of the conclusions we come to sound like sort of like, why am I working so hard for this? This is just too hard to figure out. But that was one of the theories that he brought up. And that's where I'm kind of at. And now he's moving beyond that and explaining more into Christ becoming man and how he was the only one, because he was sinless, that he would have been the only one who could have made up for what happened back in the Garden of Eden. So very interesting. Plus other factors I'm not going to get into because not a lot of people are into theology. So let's just leave it at that. And I'm almost done with this. I have, I believe, 9 more chapters to go. And again, they're not very long. You can have 2 chapters, one here, one there. So they're not very long. And I've been reading this in the early morning with my coffee when the house is quiet and my brain hasn't been cluttered with a bunch of stuff and I'm refreshed. Even if it's 3 in the morning because I can't sleep, this is when I'm reading it, and it's great because the quiet of my mind and the world around me really helps me to take in a lot more of the information. So I should be done with this within the next day or 2. And I've enjoyed this. I think this has been a good read. And last but not least, I am finishing up What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains by Nicholas Carr, The Shallows. It is a good book. He is going a lot into some background history, starting when we first had technology, and we got the radio and then the TV, and now he's working into the beginning of the internet and what it was then, and then he's going into details about that now. Okay, I mean, that's good to know. But I find myself kind of getting that desire to like, okay, let's get to the point here. That's me because I'm impatient. But there's some things I wanted to read to you that I found very interesting, and I hope it says here, and I hope this is the right quote. A page of online text viewed through a computer screen may seem similar to a page of printed text. But scrolling or clicking through a web document involves physical actions and sensory stimuli very different from those involved in holding and turning the pages of a book or a magazine. Research has shown that the cognitive act of reading draws not just on our sense of sight, but also on our sense of touch. It's tactile as well as visual. All reading, writes Anne Mangan, a Norwegian literary studies professor, is multi-sensory. There's a crucial link between the sensory motor experience of the materiality of a written work and the cognitive processing of the text content. The shift from paper to screen doesn't just change the way we navigate a piece of writing, it also influences the degree of attention we devote to it and the depth of our immersion in it. That's something I hadn't quite thought of. I'm more informed about the difference between typing and writing because there's that tactile element, and your brain is is being affected at a different part of your brain is being activated when you write what you think as opposed to type what you think. Then, okay, here's the second quote that I want to share with you. Again, talking about the difference between a printed book and a digital book. When a printed book, whether a recently published scholarly history or a 200-year-old Victorian novel, is transferred to an electronic device connected to the internet, it turns into something very like a website. Its words become wrapped in all the distractions of the networked computer. Its links and other digital enhancements propel the reader hither and yon. It loses what the late John Updike called its edges, and it dissolves into the vast, roiling waters of the net. The linearity of the printed book is shattered, along with the calm attentiveness it encourages in the reader. The high-tech features of devices like the Kindle, and at this time, and Apple's new iPad, may make it more likely that we'll read ebooks, but the way we read them will be very different from the way we read printed editions. Very good points to bring up. I remember I didn't have, I had the one paper bookmark, the bigger one. And when I found these particular ones, because I can't write in this book and I wanted to mark the pages, I was getting my bookmark and like tearing off little strips and putting them in the book itself. So there's these really, really tiny little bookmarks you see there. Just, I had to scavenge and try to find space. All right, everybody, that's it. Thanks for hanging out with me. And if you like what you heard and you saw, don't forget to press that like and subscribe button. I look forward to everybody's comments and to seeing you again in just a few days. Bye-bye.